folks, welcome to the Prepared Homestead. This is Travis. Thank you all for stopping by to watch. For those of you that watch me on a regular basis, I would hope that you would back me up on this, that I really try hard to not, stoke the fires of fear. I'm not trying to fearmonger and get everyone to panic. I try to tone it down at least enough so that it doesn't come across as me just getting on here and just trying to scare everyone to death. There's some channels that do that, and that's fine. That's their own business. But I've really tried hard to give you information that will be educational to you and help you in your preparedness journey and to realize how bad things are, but yet not so much as to cause a little bit of fear and panic within you, because that doesn't do us any good. It doesn't do us any good. I mean, that's the whole reason why we prepare, is so that we can have that insurance policy so that we don't have to panic. We don't have to, fall into a fearful behavior. Today, I will admit, I'm not trying to scare anyone. I am trying to push you a little bit more, because the deeper I get into the research on what's going on in regards to food and where we are at right now and the path that we're headed down, not just here in America, but globally, the more information, the more data that I see, I think it's far greater and far worse than probably even you and I realize. I have no doubt that the ones that control, I have people all the time asking, who are they? You talk about those that rule and control. It's the upper elites of the world, the ones that are really pushing the buttons and the levers on causing this planet to move. It's kind of like the people that are the members of the World Economic Forum. That's a good place to start if you're wanting to know who they are. While they may be behind all this, and this all may be part of their plan to bring about this global revolution of a great reset, it's very possible that the middle management people in politics and governments and these various different businesses and NGOs, they just may be trying to frantically pick up the pieces and keep the population from overreacting, because it does seem like, while the growing conversation is growing that there's a threat ahead, that we are in the midst of a real food crisis, it does seem that they're trying to kind of calm the nerves of people as much as possible. But I'm here to tell you, folks, that once you start looking at the actual numbers and making a comparison over past food crises that this planet has had, I believe with my whole heart that we are in for a really, really bad situation, and could very much be the thing that collapses our civilization. And I've talked about that for a long time now, that everything that you're seeing is all indicative of the collapse of our civilization. And I'm not just talking about the United States. I'm talking about global collapse, at the very least, of the Western world. And if you look at past civilization collapses, while it may not always be the number one thing, it usually is a part of what causes the collapse, and that's food shortages, food prices increases, inflation. All those things play a huge role in the collapse of civilizations, and we're seeing all of that and more play out right before our eyes. So is this current crisis that we're going through, this food shortages, food price increases, are they going to be the thing that causes the collapse of our civilization? Well, it's very possible. I found this article, and I will post the PDF file, of this over on our TPH network website. If you're not a member of that, you certainly should join. There's almost 5,000 people over there, and it's a really busy site. It's set up very much like Facebook. You can post. There's several subgroups, numerous subgroups that you can join to talk about specific topics, or you can just post in the general message board. And it, like I said, it looks and it functions very similar to Facebook. It's free to join. tphnetwork.com. There's an invitation link down in the description below that you can go to get right in. And there is an app available for phones. Once you get signed in, you can usually, there's information to help you with that. All right, so But I will be posting this article that I'm getting ready to talk about, and I found this, and this is from 2008. Okay, I'll show it up here, and the guy, this Lester Brown, did a little research on him, and I've come to the conclusion that I believe this guy is a liberal. Okay, now, this is one of these environmentalist globalists, but that doesn't mean that he's wrong. Okay, just because there are people that have a very opposing view of ours, doesn't mean that they're necessarily incorrect. And in this article, he lays out a very compelling argument that food crisis, food shortages can in fact cause a collapse of civilization. And it could happen to our civilization, meaning global civilization, very soon and very quickly. And he points out the food shortage or the food price increases that were dealt with back in 2008 during the 2007-2008 financial crisis on a global level, and how they were bad enough at that point that it could have led to a collapse of civilization. He talks about, numerous different countries that dealt with a lot of different civil unrest. And in fact, there's a Wikipedia page specifically devoted to the 2007 and 2008 food crisis, and it lists all the different nations that dealt with a lot of civil unrest because of that. And it was because food prices got really high. They became so high that it was difficult for the poor to afford to buy food. They were starving. They were very hungry. And when people are hungry, there's almost no other thing that causes that level of desperation as when you're hungry. When you're hungry, when your family's hungry, when you're watching your children, so emotional, crying and in physical pain because they don't have the food to eat, it causes a person to do things that they would never do in a civilized manner. And so this was what this guy was talking about back in 2008. And it's interesting in the article that he talks about the United States. He says, listen, the United States, and yes, I'm paraphrasing, but you can go look this up and confirm what I'm talking about. He said, America thinks that they're shielded from this because America is a big breadbasket and we produce an immense amount of food and we have the capability of producing an immense amount of food. He said, and that may have been true, he said, even back in the 1970s, that America restricted their exports of soybean and wheat and other items because of the financial problems that were going on during the 70s. He said, but America is no longer in the position where we can do that anymore. It showed that China now owns over $1 trillion of our debt. They're the biggest producer of our bonds. Biggest purchaser, I'm sorry. They own a lot, and they're not the only ones, but they're definitely the biggest one. And if things got really bad on a global market with food, and if China needs to feed their people, and we have enough over here that we're producing, and we refuse to sell it to China, that's going to cause problems. We're not in a position that we can say, okay, fine, we'll not export our food anymore. They could very easily cause us some major financial problems if it got worse. And we're already seeing just the comments from the president over the weekend that there's no indication whatsoever that America is going to not produce enough, that they're not going to sell to other countries or to even give it away. I mean, he flat out said that America and Canada we'll do our best to produce more to kind of fill in the gap of the lack of food coming out of Ukraine and Russia. So there's no indication whatsoever that America is going to shut our borders down and say, no, we're going to keep our own food. Canada themselves have been going through a lot of food production problems and logistic problems over the last year or so, not just with the trucker strike and all that kind of stuff, but they've been dealing with a lot of droughts and a lot of flooding in the heart of their farmland. So they're not producing near as much as they once did. And so looking at this article that I found back in 2008, I started to wonder, well, how does what's going on now compare to 2008? Like, is there a comparison? Because sometimes we need that. We hear about all this stuff of how bad it is, but is there some kind of, point that we can compare it to give us a little bit of perspective as to what's going on? So I started looking at some numbers. The United Nations puts out a global food index, and they put this out every year. It changes. It's not necessarily an inflation number. It's just a number that they produce, and they produce an overall food index, and then of course they go down through certain food categories and put that out. This chart right here will show you that in 2008. The food index, global food index, and remember, this is that previous article talking about how bad the crisis was during 2008. How bad it was, how there was global unrest, there were people dying, people being murdered, and civil unrest because of the food crisis. It was bad. Okay, it was really bad. It may not have been really bad here in the United States, but it was certainly bad enough to cause problems all over the world because food prices rose a lot. Well, food prices rose to an index of around 115. If you scroll on down to the bottom of that, and you look at what the current food index price, and this was as of last month, it's around 140. So we're substantially higher than we were at that time. So that's one indication that what's going on right now is worse than in 2008. Because you see, in 2008, 2007, the food crisis there, it was really only in regards to and only happened because of increases of food prices. It wasn't that there was an actual shortage. There wasn't anything else really going on at that time that caused major shortages or difficulties in production of food. It was just simply because of a global inflation and global recession that it caused food prices to spike and make it very difficult for the bottom earning humans to afford food to put in their bellies. That was simply it, okay? And that was enough to cause enough of a food crisis that civil unrest happened all over, and they were worried at that time. And then now we fast forward to 2022, and we're dealing with something far, far, far greater than what happened in 2008. Prices everywhere have gone up substantially more than what happened during the 2008 food crisis. Every chart that you look at, the food prices compared to 2008 are substantially higher, including fertilizer prices. Fertilizer prices, of course, are fertilizers necessary to produce the food. This is a chart that I showed just the other day, and that spike there in the middle on the fertilizer prices, that is the fertilizer prices during the 2008 food crisis. They spiked up, and that was one of the things that caused food prices to go up because it became expensive to produce food. And of course, that cost gets, trickled down to the purchaser. But that spike is nothing in comparison to the spike currently going on. Look at fertilizer prices now. They are about double what they were during 2008. So they're substantially worse. And because of that and many other factors, food prices in general are substantially worse than in 2008. We're not in a better position at all because there's a lot more going on that's causing the food prices to go up. And because it's not just food prices right now, we're actually dealing with real shortages, not just an increase of prices. It's not just that the prices are so high that it's making it difficult for, the lower class people to afford them. There is an actual real food shortage. Here's some numbers that I showed you a few weeks ago, and it's also comparing 2008 to what's going on currently. And this is talking about the amount of land that Americans produce for food, and it's specifically talking about wheat. In 2008, America planted 65 million acres of wheat. 65 million acres. So during that crisis of high food prices, we planted 65 million. Last year, we planted 46 million. Almost a third less land was planted last year in wheat than it was planted back in 2008 when the crisis was so bad. So that means that we're producing less. We are not just dealing with a financial crisis. We are dealing with a financial crisis. We're dealing with inflation that's higher than it's been in 40 years, and very possibly higher than it's ever been if we were ever able to look at the real numbers. And I've shown you several times that the real numbers are most likely in the neighborhood of 20+% inflation. We're dealing with a dollar that's losing its value, and a dollar that's on the verge of no longer being the petro oil dollar or the global reserve dollar, which is going to drastically affect the purchasing power of the American citizen. We're also dealing with them wanting to convert over to a digital dollar. All of that is a big deal. But it's more than that. We're dealing with also ridiculous high prices in fuel. We're dealing with a diesel fuel shortage. We're dealing with a diesel exhaust fluid shortage, which is a component that's necessary in many diesel engines. We're dealing with others that we're dealing with just parts and general shortages. That a lot of farmers aren't able to plant and to use the equipment because they're unable to get the parts that they need. We're also dealing with a fertilizer shortage and prices that are 300+% of what they were a year or two ago. And so it's becoming very, very expensive for a farmer to plant. And so if we're planting less acreage than we did, back in 2008, the odds are we're going to continue planting less acreage because it's far too expensive for a lot of farmers to get out there and plant. And there's another factor into all this, and that's also that didn't happen in 2008, and that's environmental. We're here in the United States, we're dealing with a record drought. I've been talking about that on here. Here's a little clip or a little snippet of an article talking about the Great Depression and how the Great Depression and the Dust Bowl just was so difficult when it came to food. And it talked about that in 1936, one of the big things that caused this great dust bowl during the Depression was 1936 was one of the worst years for drought in American history. Okay, and it caused cattle to just fall over dead. They couldn't feed the cattle because there was shortages and the prices of grain had gone up and there wasn't enough water. Fast forward to 2022, and we're not dealing with one of the worst droughts in American history. We're dealing with the worst drought in 1,200 years, folks. 1,200 years. And while our farming practices have certainly changed since the 1930s and improved in some ways, this is massive. There's huge amounts. I mean, well over half of the United States is now dealing with some level of drought conditions. And so that is hurting our ability to produce the food that needs to be produced during this current global food crisis. And everyone is looking at America as being the bailout. We're the ones that's going to bail out the world because of Russia and Ukraine and the war and all these other factors going on. People are going to look, and they are looking to the United States to produce enough food to feed the world. And yet we ourselves are dealing with exorbitantly high prices of production, the fertilizer, the fuel, the natural gas, all that kind of stuff, and the worst drought in 1,200 years. So folks, and really what I've just told you in the last 20 minutes is really just a drop in the bucket of all the things that's going on. I'm trying to compress it down enough to give to you, but I'm telling you this. As far as I can tell from what I am reading, we are in a worse position right now than ever in United States history, and maybe one of the worst positions that we are in global history when it comes to food crisis, food shortage, droughts, high prices of everything, and the very real possibility that our civilization just may not make it through this. It is biblical, it lines up perfectly, and it also lines up very well with agendas from the United Nations and plans from the World Economic Forum. So folks, again, I am not trying to terrify anyone, but I am trying to push you a little harder to let you know that things don't look good. I don't think this is going to be just a bump in the road. This is going to be absolutely catastrophic for a lot of people. It may not be catastrophic for you, but it's certainly going to be really bad for you. It's certainly going to be really tough for you. And the possibility of it worsening or something happening between now and this fall that just, exacerbates the situation is very real and could take a crisis here in the United States of being really bad to being just as catastrophic as it could be for many third world countries. Folks, you cannot slack off on this. Get serious. Stock up on what you can, every way that you can, because there are too many warning bells sounding off all over, not just in the media. I showed you yesterday, a lot of experts are sounding the alarm, but I'm telling you, if you start looking back over history and how bad things were, 2008, Great Depression, other times in world history, it's bad, and I mean it's really bad. In fact, the United Nations World Food Program director said that it's going to be a catastrophe on top of a catastrophe. So folks, take this serious. Get out there and really, really buckle down and get serious about stocking up on food and getting ready for the coming global food crisis that we are really already in. Thank you all for watching, and I'll catch you in the next video.